G'day Eagles fans, welcome back to True Eagle in the wake of another defeat to the Hawthorn Footy Club at Marvel Stadium on Sunday, where we went down by 50 points. Immediately after the game, I remember feeling quite flat that the margin got out to 50. It's a superficial thing, but we got the margin back to 32 points. We were winning the second half with about 3 minutes to go, and suddenly Hawthorn get a few bullshit goals and stretch the margin out to 50. Which makes it look like we got belted again. And in some ways we did, but I will again say that I wasn't too horrified with the actual performance itself, and we will get into why. I know people don't like me extracting positives out of another big loss, but I do think it's too superficial to just consider the margin. There were certain elements to this game that did demonstrate some progress, and that is the fact of the matter at the moment. We are just looking for small signs of progress with a fairly young team. That is the best we can hope for at the moment. And it's a bit of a contradiction. I said that I was hoping the margin would stay at 30, and then I said it's superficial. I acknowledge it was superficial, but there was a little part of me that just wanted to, only go down by 5 goals in a game where everyone would have expected us to get absolutely belted. Now, again, the margin is only superficial, so we'll move into specifics of how this game went. It started a little bit scarily. Hawthorn were getting a lot of shots on goal. They were missing quite a lot, so we were a little bit lucky in that sense. I did think there were a number of bullshit, wrong umpiring decisions that led directly to Hawthorn goals, which did, stretch out the margin further than it could have been. So perhaps we could say that their inaccuracy in front of goal was probably mitigated by that. That's my personal opinion. Ultimately, obviously, it didn't matter on the final results. A bit of discussion around Hawthorn's overall kicking throughout the game, the margin should have been more. I don't agree with that. Like I said, partly mitigated by some decisions that led directly to goals, which were frustrating or nullified some of our own shots. But for most of that game, both teams were about 50% in front of goal. So, Interestingly, I did see McWalter in his press conference say when they got the margin back to 30 points, they tried aggressively to win, which would have been incredibly ambitious. I don't think anyone, even the most ambitious West Coast fan, would have thought that West Coast was a chance of winning that game with 3 minutes to go, but perhaps it was just a little bit of a coaching decision to try and be more aggressive and take the game on and put us into that mindset of trying to win. And that presumably led to those 3 over-the-top goals. Can I just say as an aside, before we get into the other mechanics of this game, one of the really frustrating things that West Coast has done, not just this year, but over a prolonged period of time, is concede goals in red time. Now, in the third and fourth quarters, I was one of many, I'm sure, who were invested in trying to win the quarter. So West Coast has only won 2 quarters this year, which is possibly a record, I believe. I'm sure it would be after 7 rounds. So I was, barracking for us to win the quarter. And in particular, that third quarter, Hawthorn had the ball at half back with 30 seconds to go. And the ball was moving slowly. I think there was, some sort of delay, and West Coast had plenty of time to get back into position. And Hawthorn still went all the way to goal and had 2 free Hawthorn players over the top. How does that happen when the ball moves slowly? Anyway, that is an annoying thing. And then, of course, we did the same thing in the fourth quarter. I think we were winning the quarter and then concede late goals. So that was one of the many frustrating things about this game. But there were certain things we did well in this game. The forward half intercepts, I think we had way more than Hawthorn in this game. Again, only one element. But when you're coming from as far back as we are, these little things, they're signs of growth. The frustrating thing for us as a whole is that it seems like we struggle to stack this progress. It seems like, we add a layer here, and then every third week we go boom. After a good performance in round 2, for instance, against the Brisbane Lions, I thought the Derby was a bit of a step back, and then the following weeks, GWS and Carlton, not only were they further steps back, but, the Carlton one was even worse than the GWS one, despite the margin being slightly worse against GWS. I don't feel like this particular one was a big step back from the Essendon game. I think the reality is we played a much tougher opponent, and we're let down by some skill errors in particular that at times, it makes us look worse than we actually are. We can do 4 out of 5 things correctly, or we get ourselves into a good position and we concede a goal because some of our mistakes are truly horrific. Now, to balance that, it's a stern criticism, but we must have the worst skills in the competition. But I'm not so concerned big picture about the quality of our skills at the moment. I don't think that is a symptom of just being shit. It comes down to 3 things: the quality of our skills at the moment. First of all, it's the talent of the individual players we have, right? Some players can kick and some can't. And it's a broad spectrum, but there's some players you want having the ball in their hands and some that you don't. That's one element. I think generally across the board our skills are okay, although you'd probably say that even some of our best users can be erratic, meaning sometimes they're capable of a really good kick and other times they absolutely spray it. That is definitely true. I don't think that's our primary concern here. Secondly, it's how much you train it. And I understand that West Coast, as with new teams, particularly young ones, who are trying to embed a new game plan, the pre-season, I'm taking a bit of an educated guess here, but I'd imagine it wasn't super focused on skills as much as it was around team defense, structures, and how we're going to try and bed down a new game plan. So I've seen in the past with teams, that can be the final element that teams mop up, and suddenly they look a lot better very quickly. The other element here is probably mentality and composure. That's probably the other one. It does feel like West Coast, even when they have good opportunities to get a clean passage of play, it feels like we want to move the ball too quickly, or that we're constantly sort of in fear that we're about to cough the ball up, and then it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that all of those elements are at play when it comes to our skills, but big picture, that's not the way I would probably be assessing how our rebuild's going. I'm probably more looking personally for things like, how is the team defense? How are we improving certain metrics like how much of the ball we're getting inside 50, how many inside 50s we're conceding, and how is the midfield battle going? How badly are we getting slaughtered in clearances? Are we making progress? What's our method of going inside 50 as much as our skill execution? So let's break those down. The contested ball stat is still pretty bad. We lost that by 16 in this game, albeit I think for large periods of the game it was closer than that. I think they sort of ran away with it at the end. Either way, minus 16, still not a great result. Midfield battle, in terms of clearances, 45 to 36 it's a beating, but it's not as bad as we've copped in the past, and we'll go into some individuals because we have got a pretty new look midfield with a lot of young players in there. Obviously, Yo and Kelly are not playing, not that Kelly was in great form anyway, but the inside 50 count was also relatively strong. To have 50 inside 50s, I mean, that's more than we had against Essendon, and we conceded 56, which is, it's a decent amount, but it's nothing too horrific. So if we play most games against good teams and only have -6 inside 50s, then well, the days of us getting absolutely slaughtered horrendously might be behind us. But, we've got to build to that. I think against Hawthorn, that wasn't too bad. So on the other elements I mentioned, something like team defense, I think it was okay in this game when you look at the number of forward half intercepts we had, and we were forcing Hawthorn into some errors. That was good against Hawthorn as it was against Essendon. I wouldn't say over the 7 weeks that's been a strength of ours, but I would say in this game in isolation, that wasn't too bad. Our method going inside 50, this is probably quite a concern and needs to be worked on. So one element of it is our skills. There has been times where we've burned clear options, but sometimes the method itself and what we're trying to do also seems weird. Those are long bombs to contests, sitting on top of a 1-on-1 contest or a 2-on-2 contest. This is why, partly why I think Oscar Allen struggled as a forward playing in this team currently, and while Jake Waterman has been able to have some sort of impact in the games he's played, he is better in that situation than Oscar, who is better on the lead. But our method of going forward does rely heavily on the blind hack at the moment, and I think that was why we had 50 inside 50s and 11 goals 8, which is not a great return. Our efficiency of converting inside 50s to scores was well behind Hawthorn in this game. So some of that's method. I mean, it's an improvement that we didn't just concede way more inside 50s, and we managed to surge the ball forward more so than we had in previous games this year, that's for sure. But the quality of those inside 50s wasn't great either. Again, some of that is skill, some of it is decision making. So I do wonder to what extent, we're surging the ball forward blindly because of our lack of confidence, because of our lack of composure. And, if we felt like we had more time, and there were elements where we did have more time, we probably would have ended up in a better result. So I'd be interested to see how quickly we can improve on that. But even in this game, it wasn't great. There does seem to be a distinct lack of movement ahead of the footy as well. My dad harps on about this every game, but he is right. When West Coast have the ball, let's say it's on the wing or at half back, sometimes you just don't see a lot of movement up the field. And it seems odd to me that, this wouldn't be brought up in review every single week, but it does then force us to go the long bomb quite a lot, even from a free kick situation or a mark situation. So that's another thing that probably needs some improvement. We probably got away with it for a while there, back in the years when we were good because we had such quality tools. So we could either force a throw in and rely on our rucks to give us an advantage from a stoppage situation, or, one of our many gun tools could take a mark and break up play that way. So, yeah, that part is not great. Uncontested ball, we got slaughtered again, minus 61. That is something that is very, very common for West Coast games. I did listen to Liam Baker on 6PR after the game, and it was an interesting point he made. He felt that sometimes we'll cough up the ball in a situation where we really shouldn't. And it is true. Sometimes you will see 3 or 4 Eagles and 1 or 2 Hawthorn players, or opponents generally, go into a contest and, we have the ball and we either make the wrong decision or take 3 attempts to grab it, and Hawthorn run away with the ball. And when they do that, they're able to handball it and record 7 uncontested disposals from one situation where they should never have had the ball. So I thought that was fairly true, and it also speaks to our lack of team defense across the 7 rounds. Fumbling is an interesting one. It is, again, composure, confidence, experience. There are also some players who are just better at it than others in terms of handling the ball cleanly, and you generally see the best teams. And us in 2018, that was one of the hallmarks of that team. That feels like a long time ago now, because it was. But when we're moving the ball by hand, we didn't double touch it too often. And that is something that, you never see that now. You never really see clean passages of play, maybe a few a game from West Coast Eagles players. So some of that is also like talent. But to give you an example, Harley Reid at his best is one of the cleanest players, for an 18-year-old last year. Like, he was super clean. Everything he touched was pretty much one touch. But even he, particularly in this game, he dropped a pretty simple mark. There were other times where he was running onto a loose ball and he just could not pick it up. So that, to me, is confidence in that particular situation. But that's something I hope improves with time. But that is something we also probably need to consider with our drafting. Quality midfielders who can run, can win their own footy, and are clean. Like, that is clearly on the shopping list for West Coast this year. So we've talked a lot about the macro stuff, some individuals. Brady Hoff's move to the midfield was interesting. I read about it in the West Australian during the week. And so I was expecting it on game day, and he did spend a lot of time at the centre bounce. In fact, we only used 5 midfield options, and what I mean by that is actual attendees of the bounce. Excluding the rucks, you had Harley, Hutchinson, Hewitt, Triple H, Brady Hoff, Quadruple H, and a little bit of Jack Graham, who barely spent any time. I think it was just a couple of centre bounces he spent there. So not a lot of different rotations in the midfield, which is interesting. But on Brady Hoff specifically, look, he played well. I think there is plenty to work with there. He's got the athleticism to do it. He is certainly fit. He runs both ways. He's quick and can be that sort of transition midfielder for us. So I think there's a bit to work with there. He definitely did get caught holding the ball a few times. One of them was a horrific umpiring decision I'm still annoyed about. I think that led to a goal. And a few times he just got pinned with his arm behind his back. So again, first game in the role. I think to accumulate 23 touches is not too bad. It's a lot more 360 degree playing in the midfield as well, which, Hoff is probably a little bit more front and back. Does that make sense? Like, when you're playing in defense, the ball's either coming at you or you're running back. But in the midfield, it would take some time to get used to the fact that you've got threats all around you. Maybe I'm talking shit there, but it makes sense in my head. I don't know about his craft at stoppages. I actually just don't know. I know we drafted Hoff as a midfielder forward, but that does not mean that he is necessarily going to be that sort of stoppage midfielder who can read taps and win clearances. He only won the 2 in this game, but he can be a quality outside player that we do desperately need. So I think that will stick. I think McCall has sort of hinted that will stick for a little bit longer. I thought Hutchinson was also good in that role. Hutchinson's had a pretty low possession average this year. I believe he tagged Merritt last week. I'm not sure, but he didn't have a lot of the ball, and yet I thought he was playing well. But he had 19 touches in this game, 7 tackles and 3 clearances. I think Flynn's work once again. I know he got annihilated in the taps, but as someone who's become quite used to that, the around the ground impact he had, particularly in that second half, I think he would have accounted for a number of forward half turnovers himself by taking some good marks around the ground. So big stride forward from him in the last 2 weeks, and that's, despite the hit out count, I think that standard of ruck performance is probably the best we've seen since Nick Nat at West Coast. That's how low the bar is. But nonetheless, he'll certainly keep his spot. Liam Ryan was good. I think he kicked 3 goals. Liam Baker tried hard again. I I also want to shout out Hamish Davis. Nobody's talking about him, but I like him because of his running capacity, his ability to cover the ground and run hard defensively as well. I saw him on TV, running hard to cover options and shut off a potential Hawthorn outlet. That sort of thing. It doesn't feel like he's high impact because, he's just sort of getting the simple uncontested mark, a handball. But I think there is a certain thirst we have for that kind of player with that running capacity in the team. I was flat to see him subbed out. I don't know if that was a managing thing. I thought Tyrell Dewar probably should have been subbed out first, but I would be flat if we dropped Hamish Davis. I've liked what I've seen. Could be a little bit cleaner, but what was it, game 3 or 4 for him? Cover off a few concerns from this game. Ryan Marrick is a player that I like, and it will take a lot for me to change my mind on him being a good player going forward. But some of his errors in this game also made us look a bit shitter than we were. I think there were about 3 goals he conceded. One was a 50 that was a bit soft, to be fair. One was a blind handball back to a Hawthorn player in their own forward line. And the other one was one of the worst kickouts I've ever seen him, by far the worst kickout he's ever done. Kicked it to an Eagles player with their back to him, and it was immediately intercepted and goal. So things like that just put the scoreboard pressure on at a time where we didn't want it. I mean, you never want that, do you? But yeah, just a few costly errors. I do think he's a net positive, absolutely, but I'd like to see him tidy that up, and I'm sure he will. We spent 33% time in possession. I got that from Golden Wings WCE on Instagram. Good stat, because it does suggest how little we controlled the footy in this game, which we kind of knew, but it kind of confirms it, right? That's the data. And again, it's just an unwillingness to hold on to the footy. And I know we want to play quick, but I think it's probably also symptomatic of a lack of composure and a little bit of rushed possession, no doubt. 23 marks inside 50 to 6. Yeah, that's the way it felt. Allen wasn't, quite good enough for Chol on the day. Certainly not nimble enough, as we saw from that goal where Chol ran around him. I'm not feeling too critical about Allen. I don't think it was a great performance, but it was his first game as a full-time defender, and I'm willing to be patient considering, would Harry Edwards have stopped Mabior Chol? I don't think so. I kind of want to get off Allen's back a little bit, give him a chance to move into that role, and, if he becomes a good defender, that's pretty good, right? So we'll see. But I do think he'll probably move forward eventually. We lost the tackles by 14. That was another concern. I've sort of filtered in and out my pros and cons from this game throughout, but one other thing I did mention was the tackle count. I think if you concede that much possession, I think we were 80 less possessions in this game, and get out tackled, it's not uncommon, but felt like once again we chased ass. But I suppose on the other flip side of that, we ran out this game okay. Okay, we conceded 3 late goals, but I really don't think we've really been cooked in the final quarter. Probably been more a case of us dropping our heads. So in this particular game, I thought we pushed it pretty far. Felt like we were trying to win the quarter. I don't know if they were actively thinking about that on the field, but the way we ran out the game was okay. How much of a positive is that? Probably not. You'd probably prefer to be right in the game and then fade away at the end. That's not quite what happened, but I don't think fitness is the issue, put it that way. Changes for the Melbourne game? Well, this would be interesting. I suppose it is winnable against the D's, but, since they were looking horrific, they've won 2 games against opponents I don't think we would beat. So it really depends what version of Melbourne comes out. And hopefully we get a version of West Coast closer to the Essendon one, albeit, hopefully a bit better. It will probably take a better version of that performance to win this game against Melbourne. But just quickly on the changes, I think Tyrell Dewar needs a spell, not winning a lot of the footy, had single-digit disposal counts and really no impact. So I don't know if he needs a rest or what, but he probably needs some time to waffle. Archer Reed, possibly. I mean, I like Archer, don't get me wrong. He does something impressive every game, but I think he touched the ball out 4 times. So whether it be a rest or whether it be a chance to just go test his strength in the waffle and we go in a little bit smaller against Melbourne, I'm all for that because I think Jack Williams can play that full-time second ruck role. It's getting a little bit harder to make the case for Owies to keep his spot in this team. I want him to succeed and I do like him, but if you're going to be a low possession small forward, then perhaps you need to be a little bit more clinical with your opportunities. And that was a terrible flower bag. So haven't written him off as a permanent player for West Coast, but it's hard to argue that we really need him in the side at the moment when we've got a few other small forward options. And even someone like a Tom Gross, who I don't know why he was dropped, to be honest. I mean, they made him sub, presumably to manage him. But for him to lose his spot, I was pretty flat with that, and I know others were as well. So does Tom Gross add more to this side than Matt Owies in this coming round 8 against Melbourne? I would imagine probably yes, if you're looking at the bigger picture. So hopefully he finds his way back into the team. I'd imagine there are still, midfield rotations he can take, considering, like I said, we only used 4 proper midfielders against Hawthorn and a tiny little bit of Jack Graham as a 5th. So there's rotations there, and it is interesting and pleasing to see big picture that McQualter is trying a lot of different things. We've seen Allen swung forward and back. We've seen Harley spend more time in the midfield this week, but played a little bit back. Hewitt got more time against Essendon, and it really paid off. And Brady Hoff into the midfield. Jack Hutchinson also started the year on a wing, and now he's playing in the midfield. So there is some good experimentation there. And we've also seen a lot of debuts. So we can't really fault McQualter for trying new things, even if, the results haven't been there yet. So I, like you, am praying for our first win. It is depressing being 0-7. And we've got 2 games against Melbourne and Richmond, which are in theory winnable, albeit probably not tipping us at this current stage in time. But I will go in full of hope, as I always do. And I look forward to your comments this week. Let me know, guys, what you took from this round. And I'll see you in the next one. Up the Eagles.